Hello, accounting scholars. Welcome back. Hey, we're going to talk about different types of product and non-product costs today. The reason these are important is because if you're a company that manufactures products, you need to have a good understanding of what the different types of costs are that go into the manufacturing of your product. For instance, in this particular case, in this picture, you can see a person on a manufacturing assembly line putting together a laptop computer. That laptop is made up of a variety of different types of costs: the keyboard, the screen, the frame. So one of the ways that costs are defined is product costs are defined as those costs that are incurred in connection with the conversion process. And as you remember, there's those three primary processes we talked about earlier in our prior chapter. It's a revenue process, the conversion process, and the expenditure process. So product costs are those associated with producing a product. Then you have non-product costs. And as you can see here, the visual of our friend from the office, non-product costs are typically associated with the revenue and expenditure process as opposed to the conversion process. They here again are not associated with producing the product, but they are associated with selling the product and administration or administering the the administrative functions in a company. So again, the differentiation you want to have in your mind: product costs associated with the conversion process, non-product costs associated with the revenue and expenditure processes. Okay, so let's go back to product costs and let's identify what are the three categories of product costs. Again, these are costs associated with the conversion process. So, as you might expect, there is a category called direct materials, stuff you use to make a product. Typically, the direct material costs are the costs associated with the primary materials used in the product. And there are some requirements here that must be met. They must be traceable, meaning that they can be identified specifically with the product as a particular piece of material that is used in the product. And secondly, they must be expensive enough to warrant tracing, to warrant the fact that you're monitoring these particular costs. If they're essentially very very low or irrelevant, you wouldn't necessarily want to monitor those costs. So all right, so those are direct materials. That's the stuff you use to make a product. In the previous example, direct material costs in regard to the laptop would be the keyboard, the screens, the printed circuit boards, and things of that nature. Okay, then secondly, we have direct labor. Okay, these are the people that make the product, right? These are the people that put the product together. As was shown in the previous slide, those would be the workers on the assembly line. They make it happen. It's the direct labor costs are the costs of laborers actually making the product. That's their focus. And then we have a term that you may or may not be familiar with, but it's called manufacturing overhead. Those are the costs that kind of reside in the factory where products are made, but they're not necessarily directly associated with a particular product. For instance, it could be things like utilities or rent for a building. So manufacturing overhead are all manufacturing costs that are not classified as direct materials or direct labor. These would be sometimes called indirect materials, and as I mentioned before, this could include the manufacturing manager, the utilities expense, the rent expense, and other expenses such as depreciation. Okay, so those are the three types of product costs: direct materials, direct labor, and manufacturing overhead. Make sure you've got good notes on all of those. All right, so what are the activities levels associated with these particular costs? Now, these relate to the different types of, to some extent, the different types of manufacturing and the way that you manufacture. So one of these particular costs is called unit-related costs. Now, unit-related costs are costs that vary with the number of units sold. So the more units you produce or sell, the higher the unit-related costs. Okay, then there is a second type of cost called batch-related costs. And as you might expect, the word batch means a larger number of products that are part of a group or a batch. So these costs are the costs that vary with the number of batches, regardless of the number of units in a batch. So it wouldn't make any difference whether you made a batch of 100 units or you made a batch of 1,000 units. The batch-related costs vary with the number of batches, not the number of units in a batch. So these costs, for instance, would be if you had 5 batches, the batch-related costs would be higher if you had 10 batches. So again, difference between a unit-related, which relates to a particular unit, versus a batch-related, which relates to how many groups of products or batches do you make. All right, there are other costs associated with activity levels as well. In addition to unit and batch related costs, there's something called product sustaining costs. And sustaining is a key word here, because what these product sustaining costs relate to are the costs that vary with the number of product lines, regardless of the number of units or batches associated with the product lines. So here again, this is a higher level characterization of costs. We started at the unit level, then we started at the batch level, and now we're saying we're going to define a new group, which is product sustaining, or the costs that vary with the number of product lines, number of different products that you offer. And again, these product sustaining costs are independent of the number of units or batches associated with the product line. And then last but not least, the fourth cost that is associated with activity levels are the facility sustaining costs. Now, as you might expect, these costs are the costs incurred to maintain the operating capacity. Meaning the costs that you need to essentially operate your factory. These costs typically do not vary in the short term. So let's give some examples of these particular types of costs. What would be product and non-product costs associated with the various costs that we define? So in this particular case, if you took unit-related costs, an example of a product cost would be materials, as you might expect. Non-product costs, however, would be those associated with the revenue and expenditure process, as opposed to the conversion process, which would be commissions. Then we'd have batch-related costs, where you're making, again, groups of products. And in this particular case, you would have setup costs. When you think about setup costs, the time it takes to set up the line to make a particular batch. The non-product costs associated with this would be ordering, which typically would be part of the expenditure process. Now we move down to product sustaining costs, and those costs examples of those costs in the product related would be research and development. You have engineers that design new products. That's typically part of the research and development process. On the other hand, the non-product costs, after you make the products or in the conversion process, you have advertising, which would be part of the revenue process. And then last but not least, you have facility sustaining costs, costs associated with the facility. Examples of product costs associated with this would be the rental of equipment, and non-product costs would be the CEO salary, the payment of salary to the president and CEO of the company. So here again, guys, this is a chart you want to get in your notes, and you did a great job here. So we're gonna end it here, and have a great night.